So my name's Allison, and I was diagnosed in 2013 with terminal malignant brain cancer. And it was a high grade. I was expected mean survival time 6.8 months. I chose to pursue the metabolic approach to cancer and several other futuristic treatments. And I am proud to say that I am 9 years out right now. I have outlived my diagnosis by almost 8.5 years. And I must say, I have never felt prouder. I have never felt more happy. I have never felt this sense of well-being in my entire life. Cancer is a great teacher. I live at Holy Terror Farm, an organic farm in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. And I also run Allison's anti-cancer personalized nutrition. In my past lives, I was a professional extreme skier. I jumped off cliffs for a living. That was, a little crazy. And I've also been a climate change consultant. So in 2013, I was, feeling a little bit off, but I had this big talk with Microsoft. It was like one of my biggest extreme skiing speeches, and I forgot to get on the plane. So my husband was like, this is a little odd. Then a few weeks later, I actually was cooking in the kitchen and the grease caught on fire on the stove. And instead of me trying to put it out, I was watching the flames, like I was mesmerized by these flames. And my husband walked in and said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, it's just so beautiful." And this is not okay. Something's really wrong with my wife. I've been kind of in denial about it. I didn't really realize at all what was going on. He could see it, but you couldn't put a finger on it. It just seems like odd behavior. Is she going crazy? Is she depressed? Is she just weird? Who knows? And so he rushed me to the emergency room. The doctors were very casual. Then they came back with like a scowl on their face. And I barely even remember this. And you can show the picture. I mean, my tumor was like almost as big as my brain. The fact that I was walking and talking was really a miracle. And the doctors were so casual about it. They were like, "Oh, do you want to come in next week and we'll talk about surgery?" And we're all like, whoa, we need to get to a major city because we live in the middle of nowhere. We don't want to be at a podunk hospital. We need some serious help. Luckily, my family got on board at that time. We, called lots of brain surgeons. We knew this was going to be major surgery. Of course, it was hard to get in. I ended up getting rushed to Denver and got in with a really amazing surgeon. It was a 10-hour surgery to get the thing out. At first, they thought it was a meningioma, and they were like, "Oh, no big deal." But then the pathology came back, and it was a hemangiopericytoma. And this is a type of cancer that just keeps growing back. It also loves to metastasize down the spine and then get into all your organs. So it was very, very serious. The doctors at the time, they were like, "Oh, well, you're young and in shape, and this is going to be no big deal." Meanwhile, I'm recovering at home and I'm looking on the internet, and I find that the mean survival time is like 6.8 months. And luckily, the surgery was so traumatic that they didn't want to start chemo or radiation for 6 months. So meanwhile, I'm on Dr. Google. Luckily found Dr. Nasha Winters, long story short, and she talked about, let's look at why you get cancer. Let's look at what's causing it, the root causes, and then we're going to go at it from that angle and the whole metabolic approach to cancer. And I'm a science geek, so it made sense to me because what she was saying resonated. Why do we get sick? It's dis-ease, not just disease. It's, we're unhealthy for a reason. Now, I thought I'm an organic farmer. I'm a professional extreme skier. I'm exercising every day. I'm eating right. I thought I was healthy. And if I had $1 for every one of my clients that said, I am healthy, I'm like, but you have cancer, right? So obviously something is not in alignment and we need to dig into the root causes. And I did a seminar with Dr. Nisha, a 4-day retreat, and it just changed my life. Obviously jumped on board with her. And I actually decided to turn down the chemo and radiation. She and I looked at the tumor pathology together. And when you looked at the tumor pathology, the tumor personality actually wasn't susceptible to radiation, and it wasn't susceptible to chemo. Now, I'm not against those things. They can be the right tool for the job. But in my case, if you dug really deep, and this is not what the doctors found, they just really didn't look at it that closely. And I decided I'm going to go for the full metabolic approach. I'm going to look at all the reasons I got sick. I boil it down to 3 main things. I call it SIT, stress, insulin, and toxins. Now, you can also call it SHIT, which is stress, hormones, insulin, and toxins. Nisha has 10 different areas. I just find for most of my clients that it's too confusing and they can remember SIT and SHIT. So anyway, so I just took my type A personality and dove into the ketogenic diet. I dove into, getting my insulin resistance. I had no idea that all these subsets of kind of ill health, I had all these things going on throughout my whole life. When I got diagnosed, I was 48. I thought it was normal to have a thyroid disorder. I thought it was normal to have fibroids. I thought it was normal to have arthritis. I thought it was normal to have pain in my joints. I thought it was normal to have bladder infections, yeast infections, lung infections. What really blew my mind is every single malady that I have disappeared within 6 months of implementing. Now, this is an anti-cancer ketogenic diet. Now, there's a big difference between like internet keto and what I call anti-cancer keto. I am focusing on getting 9 cups of vegetables a day, really, really high quality meats, grass-fed, grass-finished, wild-caught, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about the quality of the food and what the animals ate. Also, I'm a really big fan of genetics, so dove really deep into my genes and what I should be eating and what I should not be eating. And a lot of times everybody's just like, one size fits all. You should eat, kale because it's a cruciferous vegetable. Well, I have a genetic mutation, CBS, that doesn't process cruciferous vegetables very well. So, here I was eating tons and tons of kale, but I couldn't really digest it very well. Now, meanwhile, I was a vegetarian, my genetics came back and it turned out I was the worst vegetarian possible because I have a gene called TCF7L2, which doesn't allow the processing for grains and legumes. So I was eating the exact opposite of what I should be eating. And then meanwhile, we ran my husband's DNA. He loves red meat. And it turns out he had genetic hemochromatosis and shouldn't eat red meat. So I think the overall message that I heard is we really need to personalize our diet, and not only for our genes, but also for the expression of our genes, looking at our labs, and then also looking at tumor pathology and health history. I love being a Sherlock Holmes and kind of weaving all the details together and figuring out what I should do and what I should not do. I loved this approach so much. Within a year, Nisha had asked me if I wanted to train with her. And so I said, hell yeah. I did a 1-year program with Nisha, and that launched, basically I stopped my extreme skiing career and decided to go into personalized nutrition. And I've been doing every single class I could get my hands on since then. Obviously taking care of my stress as well, and taking lots of self-care, lots and lots of self-care. For 5 years, I was tumor-free and the doctors could not believe it. Then lo and behold, there were a few little details that I had missed. We had missed that we had radon in our water and in our air. I also had missed that I had Lyme disease. Also had missed that I had some parasites. And the biggie, the elephant in the living room, well, one of them, another one, dairy. Turns out my DNA, I cannot process dairy. So I finally quit dairy. But then my toxin profile came back, and we live very rurally and grow and raise almost all our own food except for coffee, chocolate, and salt. So when my tox report came back, it was crazy. I was filled with every chemical known to mankind. And Naisha and I were just scratching our heads like, what is going on here? She went to a medical conference very recently, and it was all about the wildfires and the wildfires spreading chemicals. I also have a gene called ApoE. Everybody's probably heard of it. It also makes you very susceptible to air pollution. And also there's plenty of research papers on PubMed linking air pollution to brain cancers. So I think also Lyme disease they found is crossed the blood-brain barrier. So all I can say is I'm doing really well right now. I've had some reoccurrences. I've had some subsequent surgeries. I am just digging and digging for more information. Also, there's like full effort on this side, full surrender over here. And I'm working on the surrender part because I can't sit here and stress out about the air pollution that there's almost nothing I can do about, right? So I put the full effort and the full surrender together into Namaste. I'm doing some amazing IV treatments right now that are like alpha lipoic acid, high dose vitamin C. I'm doing some off-label drugs, Niclosamide as well. I've done hyperbaric oxygen. I'm also now doing hyperthermia. I'm game to try it all, and I'm all about test, don't guess. So I always test my labs. I test 80 labs a month. I have for 9 years. So my lab spreadsheet is a couple football fields long. And so I can see the results of each treatment because I add them separately, and I see the before and the after. So the proof is in the pudding in my book, like, is something working? Then I can test and see if it is working. Also doing infrared saunas, of course, gentle detox. I mean, the list is very long as far as self-care, lots and lots of meditation. The mental emotional component of cancer is so key. And so many people say, oh, I'm going to get to that later. But the reality is, let's say you're eating a perfect anti-cancer keto diet and you're under 20 total grams of carbs and 12 grams of net carbs, and your protein's perfect and your fats are high and your weight is perfect. But then all of a sudden you have a stressful day, your cortisol is going to go through the roof. And when your cortisol goes through the roof, then your insulin is going to go through the roof. So I could be eating perfectly and have a stressful day, and then I could be feeding cancer by my thoughts. And that is, woo, not to even mention childhood trauma. That's a whole nother. But, I always say that cancer is the best teacher. I never would have dug this deep into my health, and I really feel blessed about that. But cancer is also a freaking pain in the ass as well. It's a roller coaster, but I've really learned that health is not linear. The journey to health is a roller coaster, and to accept that, because, if you think that I'm just going to start here and I'm going to end up here and everything's going to be perfect, if you have that expectation, it doesn't quite work that way. Life just doesn't work that way, right? It's a roller coaster. Yeah, so when I started this journey in 2013, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there about the ketogenic diet. And of course, we didn't have amazing things like chronometer.com where we can track our macros. We didn't have Keto Mojo where we can like easily test our ketones at a low budget. It was kind of like trial and error, doing things. I mean, I didn't know that milk had sugar in it and that skim milk had more sugar in it than full fat milk. So learning the hard way in the beginning, which is why I think was inspired many years ago to write my anti-cancer cookbook, because the recipes out there on the internet were just way too high in carbs. And they were full of like what I call like Costco sausage and cream cheese, like not well sourced things, and full of a lot of things like almonds, which are sprayed really heavily. So, you know, I tend to avoid almonds because I think they're too high in toxins. So in the beginning, I will say I felt lost. I really thought I was eating healthy with my 9 cups of grains a day, you know, and so you all of a sudden, like, if you don't have grains and rice and pasta and beans, like, what do you eat? And so the evolution of figuring out what to eat on a diet, how to lower my insulin, how to lower my hemoglobin A1C, how to lower my fasting glucose, how to increase my ketones, how to get hydrated, you know, how to get electrolytes, you know, how to learn how to have enough magnesium so that you're pooping 2 to 3 times a day so you can detox. These things were all super hard in the beginning. And I think that's why now with my coaching business, I created a 28-day program for people to, like, step 1, here's day 1. Let's look at your water report and let's figure out if you need to buy a water filter, you know, and day 2, let's talk to your doctors. Here are some healthy questions for your doctors. And so it walks people through what you can do, because I was so lost. I feel that there's a lot of other people out there that are equally as lost and equally as confused. And I think the other thing that's really important is everybody's different. Every cancer is different, and there's no one size fits all. And that we're all expecting to eat the same low carb diet, and it's going to be the right fit for everybody. And we're all really, really different. We want to look at the tumor pathology. We want to look at your own DNA. We want to look at your epigenetics. We want to look at your blood markers. And that's the part that I find very fun, because otherwise you just feel like I'm just waiting for my next scan and I'm just petrified. If you have stuff to do that makes you feel empowered, that you're taking charge of your health. Oh, I see that my copper is too high, so I need to take zinc citrate to lower that cancer growth factor. And then I test my copper next month and I realize that I've pulled it into Dr. Nisha's healthy range and I've eliminated 1 more cancer growth factor. I think of it that way. Just these steps, getting rid of each cancer growth factor 1 day at a time. And that just feels so hopeful. And you don't have to listen to your crazy doctor saying that you have 6 months to live and you've got to do XYZ PDQ or you're not going to make it. I like taking charge of my health, and it's not for everybody, but I enjoy it. And I like to help people who need some help taking charge, because it's difficult. It's a lot of work. My big question to my doctor is, how many of my types of cancer, and this is a big question I have a lot of people ask, is of the people that have my type of cancer and do what you recommend, surgery, chemo, radiation in my case, how many of them are living a long, happy life and dying of old age? And then I give them year limits, like 5 years. How many make it to 5 years? And they might say, oh, well, 5%. And then how many make it to 10 years? And they might say, well, 2%. And then how many make it to 15 years? And then we got to the big 0. And I was like, well, why would I choose that route if you're basically saying to me that you don't have a cure for my type of cancer? When I told my doctors that I wasn't going to do what they wanted me to do, they actually tried to disown me. And I was really mad. I said, well, you guys are good surgeons. And can you send me a piece of paper that I can sign that you say, you know, we're recommending this and I'm choosing not to do this and it's not your fault. And they said they never did send that piece of paper, but they actually ended up undivorcing me. What I do and what I tell people is it's not necessarily about dumping one doctor and getting another one. I just keep adding to my team. I think I have 14, 15, 16, 17 doctors all over the country. And luckily, Naisha was my guide, Dr. Naisha Winters. And I always say, you've got to really choose who's at the top of your pyramid. You know, ideally, myself, I'm at the top of the pyramid, but I need someone that anytime any one of my 18 doctors makes a recommendation, that I have someone that can run through all that and say, does that make sense? Because you've got to include everything you're doing in your healthcare plan. Like such and such a doctor might recommend, oh, let's say immunotherapy, but meanwhile, you might be on something else that is in complete no-go with them combined. So you've got to have someone that's like kind of looking out for your overall healthcare plan. And a lot of people don't have that person. And luckily, Dr. Naisha Winters has trained a lot of other doctors underneath her. I was so lucky that I had her for like 2 years. Almost every single month I could check in with her and say, you know, I'd be freaking out about something else. Like, oh my gosh, I just found out that I had radon. And she'd be like, calm down, Allison, you know, let's mitigate the radon and let's just like move on. You know, cancer isn't caused by one thing. And we often get really tied up and like, oh my goodness, my one lab looks terrible. You have to look at the whole picture and look at all the cancer growth factors that are contributing to your ill health and which ones are players and which ones are not players. And it's kind of like a process of elimination. You can put a line through what it isn't. And when you put a line through what it isn't, then you can slowly figure out what are your big factors. And it does come down to kind of stress, insulin, and toxins for a lot of people. My insurance was covering most of the conventional therapies, but for example, like proton therapy would have been $150,000. Chemo was $30,000 a month. And then, you know, then you look at really, a lot of people don't look at the side effects. You know, what are the side effects? And I ask my doctors, if I do, you know, brain radiation, what's going to happen to me later? And they were like, well, you know, you could get cancer in 10 or 15 years, but we're not going to worry about that because basically, you know, what they're not saying is that you're going to die of your cancer right now. So we don't really care. So some of the alternative, I don't like to call them alternative therapies because I want to call them futuristic therapies, or we can also talk about them as being historic therapies, right? Because Otto Warburg and the whole Warburg effect of cancer and cancer metabolically preferring to ferment glucose. So that theory was like way back in the 1800s. And now I feel like it's the future of cancer as well. So if we can undermine cancer by starving it of its preferred fuels, stress, insulin, and toxins, then we're going to have more health and hopefully undermine that cancer enough so that when we pulse it with some therapies on top of that, that the cancer cells are in a weak, vulnerable position and they can die and hopefully get eliminated from the body, and that your healthy cells get healthier. I mean, I feel better now at 57 than I did when I was 25. When I was 25, I mean, I had every known like ache and pain and illness, my whole body. And I just kept putting, the check engine light was on, but I just kept putting tape over it. I thought that that was normal to just keep experiencing all these things as you get older. Oh, it's normal to get arthritis. It's normal to get thyroid disease. It's normal to get fibroids. Like, it's normal to get allergies. It's not normal. Those are all signs of inflammation. Yet we're not taught the basics of inflammation, the basics of mitochondrial damage, the basics of why we get sick. If we were all taught this as babies, we would not be having this conversation right now. I would say to people that are out there panicking, because if you hear that C word, you know that your whole life just changes in a heartbeat. And the doctors push you to make a decision. I would say take an enormous deep breath. Go down the road that feels good for you, because this isn't about everybody else. This is about your heart, filling it with love, and doing a treatment and a diet that makes sense for you, because this is your life. You can take charge of your life. You can use cancer to paralyze you, or you can use cancer to take charge of your health in ways that you never knew possible. And I know if you just got diagnosed, you would say I'm crazy, because I would have told me I was crazy if I heard that same thing. But really look around and see what makes sense, and look at the science, because the science is behind us. And there are many thousands, millions of us out there that have used this approach to live a long, happy life and die of old age.